Hello and a very warm welcome to our event today on the EU's new migration policy and what it will do differently to its previous migration policy. My name is Gunther Wolf and I'm the director of Bruegel, and I'm extremely pleased and honored to host today Margaritis Skinas, who is the Vice President of the European Commission in charge of migration, and precisely his title is Vice President for promoting our European way of life. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm also very pleased to welcome Hanne Behrens. Hanne Behrens is the director of the Migration Policy Institute in Europe. She will react to the speech that the Vice President will give. So we will start with a speech in which the Vice President will lay out his understanding, his vision of the new Pact for Migration. Then I will turn to Hanne for a discussion. And then, of course, we will have a bit of time here in the panel to discuss, but also to get your questions from the audience to be addressed to our two panelists, and in particular to the Vice President, of course. If you would like to ask a question, please do not hesitate to go on the website Slido and type in the code migration. It's easy to remember. You just type it in and then you can type in your question, and I will be seeing the questions on my smartphone and will be able to read some of them. I try to cover as many as possible, but as always, I can only cover some of them, but it really helps in the conversation to see what kind of questions come in, and allows us to have a richer and more, I think, fruitful discussion with the Vice President. So without much further ado, let me thank you again, Margaritis, and give the floor to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to take part in this Bruegel events. I hope soon also physically, because this is probably one of the best ideas that you have to step off the hamster wheel from time to time and take a broader look at the policies and the stakes around us. I think we very often, all in Brussels, are victims of this hamster wheel syndrome. We do things repeatedly, and we need someone to stop the wheel and take us to a broader discussion. So I appreciate the invitation. And of course, migration policy is a subject that is particularly suitable for such a discussion. I don't want this to be a one-sided discussion, so I will say a few things just to kickstart, and then I will be very happy to also to listen to Hanne and to colleagues' views and questions. The starting point for today's subject, I think, is a confession or a recognition, which is not very pleasant, but I think it's necessary. And this is that the European Union does not have a European migration and asylum policy. It's painful to say, but this is the case. We can do, and we have done so many things together. We have the biggest market, the second currency, common policies across the policy spectrum, but on migration and asylum policy, we are faced with a situation where instead of a cohesive, holistic framework at the European level, we have a patchwork of different regulatory solutions, some of them by international law, others of our own making, but the overall result of this patchwork is that it produces very unequal outcomes and contributes some of the situations that nobody wants to see in Europe, but we keep seeing them, like the ones in Moria, in the Greek islands, in the Canary Islands, and in Calais, to name a few. So I'm convinced, and the von der Leyen Commission had this as at the core of our political priorities, that the moment has come for Europe to have an EU migration and asylum policy. And as you know, I don't want to repeat things that are known. Our proposal is on the table as of the 23rd of September. And it's a proposal on which I would like to say a few words. It's a proposal which is a new beginning. Actually, we are turning a new leaf in migration policy. And we're doing so having spent too much time, I would say, a lot of time, on drawing the lessons of the 2016 failure, because everybody knows that we also tried in 2016 to get this right and we failed. So one has to draw the lessons of the 2016 exercise. And a second, I think, starting point for the pact is to recognize that when we discuss migration policy, there are no binary choices. There is no either or. There is no solidarity or responsibility. There is no false dilemmas. There are no red lines that are redder than someone else's red lines. So we have to come to the conclusion that everybody has concerns in this very complex equation that needs to be addressed. So to do that, Commissioner Johansson and I have undertaken in pre-pandemic, thank God, world, the most extensive consultation process ever delivered on migration. We traveled to all capitals, all 27 capitals. We met heads of state and government and ministers. We spent hours and hours with all the political families in parliament, precisely to craft this proposal as, how should I call this? As a landing zone where everybody can land. And contrary to what happened in 2016, create the conditions for an agreement. In 2016, the Commission proposed a proposal, how should I call this, by the heart, a very ideal, romantic, if you like, proposal, but which I defended, by the way, urbi et orbi in my previous capacity as chief spokesperson, only to realize 4 years later that the situation is much more complex and one has to take a broader look, hence the analogy now of this landing zone. So, what is there? And let's again take it quickly because I think it's useful for the discussion. We have used 3 layers for the pact, 3 interconnected layers. The first, which was not there in 2016, but it is now, is the need to have a meaningful external dimension to the EU migration and asylum policy. Europe cannot cope with migration unless we find a way to engage meaningfully with the countries of origin and transit and our neighbors that are crucial in the management of migratory flows. This is a fundamental element. This is probably the most consensual point that came out of our consultations from all latitudes of European geography. Everybody told us, do something on external relations. And this do something is not turning the page or incrementally doing things differently. This needs a paradigm change. This needs to engage with our partners, countries of origin and transit in Africa, but not only in Africa, up to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and make them see that we can help them to create more opportunities for their people to make a better life there instead of putting their lives in the hands of the smugglers in the Aegean or in the Atlantic or in the Central Med. And secondly, convince them that we can help them not only just to do that, but also to build more capacity in terms of their asylum and borders procedure, migration management, make them receive and accept more returns and readmissions, but do that in a win-win context, because it is also on their an orderly management of migration. It's also in their interest. It's not like us against them. This has to be crafted as a win-win partnership. And we are ready to mobilize in this change of paradigm everything that we have at the EU level to help them. We can do it, of course, with money, investments, trade, visas, Erasmus scholarships. Europe can do much more to make this happen. So that's the first layer of work, which is very evident and very central in the pact. The second is something else which was not equally not well covered in the 2016 proposal, and equally a responsibility element, which is borders. The European Union needs to build a borders identity, if you like. First of all, patrol our borders, keep our external borders. And that's why Frontex is one of the biggest winners of the new budget about to be concluded across the street, with 10,000 standing corps of permanent officials with their own equipment. So first thing, Europe should keep patrol, protect our external border. Fight the smugglers, fight those that are becoming rich out of human misery, face hybrid threats. But at the same time, also on borders, other than protecting the border, we should also have very effective procedures that would allow us to process people arriving at the external borders of the European Union. To put it differently, Gudrun, if someone arrives at the external border of the European Union, something has to happen. We need to know who he or she is. We need to be able to establish his or her asylum profile, whether he has chances to obtain asylum protection or not. We have to have health check, security check. So this is the new procedure that we're introducing, a screening procedure at the border that will determine very quickly the next steps in the sequence of processing asylum or returns, depending on the findings. So this is very important. It's classical. It's important, this element of borders. And finally, the third and final layer is something that we had in 2016, but without the other two. We had mainly that, which was the solidarity and burden sharing element. In 2016, there was reluctance from Central Eastern Europe to move on solidarity because we failed to provide the other two layers. Now we are more confident that we can claim effective burden sharing and solidarity. We think that the solidarity will be the norm in our new system, because we have provided, if you like, for a more intelligent mix. I don't know if this sounds in English, probably this is Brussels bubble English, but I will say it nevertheless.
We all speak it.
I will speak it nevertheless. I've been speaking it for years. Is a smart solidarity mix, if you like. In what sense? In the sense that the member states of first entry will have the absolute assurance that when they push the solidarity button and they request a number of things from the European Union, this will be granted. But at the same time, we make sure that those who were very reluctant in 2016 on the issue of compulsory, obligatory relocation from the start would be able now to have alternative solutions to relocation, but meaningful alternative solutions, solutions that would take pressure off the system and will help the member states of first entry. And one of these ideas is, of course, this new concept of returns sponsorship, where instead of accepting relocations, member states could organize on behalf of the Union orderly and humane returns operations with the help of our agencies and with the financing of the EU budget so that they can contribute to the intelligence solidarity mix without having the red lines of 2016 and at the same time taking pressure off the system. So I think I should finish by saying that what is now on the table, and that's the reply to your second part of your question that you asked with the seminar title today, why this time is more likely to succeed. I would say that for the first time, what the Commission presents is not only a more balanced peace landing zone, as I described it, but there's something else which is very useful and novel, is that everything that is in the proposal represents a connected whole. It's like a circuit type of system. That means it's a system where there is only one circuit, that everything connects to everything else. So you start from screening, border procedure, asylum, return, solidarity, everything connects to everything else. This is precisely what we don't have now. This is what we do not have now. That's why we get 20,000 people from Morocco to Canary Islands all of a sudden. That's why we have bottlenecks in Moria or Calais, because we do not have this connected circuit with a European orderly procedure. And the final point for these countries that are not countries of first entry and are not countries from the East, the rest of the countries, especially those who are reception countries like Germany, France, Sweden, and others. This block of member states, with the proposal that we have presented, they also gain in terms of predictability. This closed circuit system allows them to know what happens. There is order, there is sequence, and there is not this uncoordinated, very passionate debates. Today we have to accept 200 unaccompanied minors. The day after that we have to get 2,000 people more. A boat was found there. Let's take so the predictability element. I think it's very important for these countries of reception. And there are, of course, many other issues that I don't want now to mention, like the legal migration, but we can discuss this separately. But this is a unique chance to get it right. And I'm personally very much conscious of the need to invest a lot. And I hope that further to the progress that the Germans did in their presidency, we will be able to go faster with the Portuguese, the Slovenes, so that before the French presidential election, we have an agreement. If it's possible to have an agreement even before the German legislative election, that's very ambitious, that would be even better. Thank you, Vitro.
Thank you so much, Vice President, for this very clear exposition of the pact, the new pact. Migration is always a very emotional topic, and I think you managed to really explain what is in this pact in a sort of very Cartesian, rational way. But nevertheless, I'm sure there is a lot of issues we can discuss, and I already see that on the chat on Slido, there's lots of questions. For those who have joined late, please do go on Slido and type in the code word migration, and then you can add questions to the list of questions that I receive here and that I can ask to the Commission Vice President. Lots of questions, I'm sure, will emerge on the various parts of the connected whole that you described. And I think many people, of course, have already expressed their criticism of the various parts. And I think it will be very interesting to discuss and dissect those criticisms in some more detail. But before going to the audience, I do want to turn to our second guest, Hanne Behrens, Director of the Migration Policy Institute here in Brussels also, who is a migration specialist and who will give us her first take on what we just heard. Hanne, please.
Thank you very much, Guntram. And yes, I would like to also thank you for having me this afternoon and join the conversation with Vice President Skinas. In order to respond to your question about what will be different this time around, we could have a very elaborate discussion of all the little small details within the pact, but I propose to zoom out and actually focus on two bigger points. On the one hand, relating to the negotiation, because this is still the negotiation phase, and secondly, the implementation phase. So Guntram, please hang on for both of them. Firstly, when it comes to the negotiation, what we've just heard, I think, is illustrative of this European Commission, is that it's a more pragmatic commission that's very much focused on problem solving. And both the fact that it pursues a political agreement on migration via a pact, and linked with some, of course, legislative proposals. And secondly, the content of the pact demonstrate that clearly. As the Vice President has already alluded to, it is an issue that goes to the core of the responsibilities of a political entity. One of the core responsibilities that a political entity has towards its members, Europe's members, its citizens, all those on soil. And to take up that responsibility, it really has to go beyond the back and forth that we've seen over the past years, discussions about values, solidarity, and responsibility sharing, but also has to bring in a third element. Policy making on very divisive and very difficult issues, such as migration needs to balance those concepts also with a third one, and that's interests. And in the absence of such balancing and always trying to seek an equilibrium on all of these concepts of solidarity and responsibility sharing, we will have the same conversations over and over again that we've seen in the past years. And interests are not static. The best and then the masters in negotiation know this very well, that it's a matter also of trying to make sure that your counterparts maybe discover interests that they didn't know they were aware of in the past. And so in that sense, the pact and the way it, for example, has envisaged to pursue solidarity between the member states demonstrates that. It actually makes a quite drastic shift in terms of how it approaches the internal dimension of how we deal with asylum. It abandons this one size fits for all and instead allows member states to come forth with different kinds of responsibilities, some of which the Vice President has outlined, and allows, to a certain extent, for us to recognize the very different migratory and political context that each member state faces. The question, of course, and this is the first question I have in relation to the negotiations, is whether this shift from harmonization to differentiation that we clearly see in the pact and the proposals laid down is sufficient to bring in all the different actors and to allow all of these EU member states to agree on this pact. So this is the first question we have. Or will the Vice President and the larger Commission have to bring in bargaining chips of interest that are tied to other policy domains, that are tied to the Schengen membership, for example? And that's a really important one. Then the second issue concerns the implementation of the pact. Policy implementation rests on trust. Trust between the EU member states, but also trust between those who have the rights of migrants and refugees at heart and those who are committed to protecting borders and maintaining public security. And at present, we cannot ignore the fact that the proposals that are laid down in the pact actually require, or the Commission is asking from all stakeholders to make a leap of faith. Why? Because some of the policy tools we've just heard are new, for example, return sponsorship. Some of them, such as screening, have been tested in some member states, but not in others. But also there's an issue of differential timing. So when it comes to the mandatory border procedure, there we will expect the external member states to really invest now in infrastructure, in staff, to make sure that they can actually implement this border procedure. But they are left to see as to whether or not the other member states will actually hold up their part of the bargain when it comes to relocation and sponsorship. And so the recent reaction, the non-paper by the southern member states, suggest this kind of nervousness. It's almost like a game of musical chairs. I don't know if that's a correct English name, but we don't dare to get off from our seat because we're so afraid that somebody will have moved one of the chairs and we'll be left isolated and doing things all at our own. And so how can we nurture and grow this kind of trust? Trust, in our view, is a feeble creature if it really relies only on legal acts. It also really requires practical mechanisms. So, for example, how will we know, how can we make sure that if a rejected asylum seeker is, after 4 or 8 months, transferred to the member state that said, we will take care of this returnee, how can we make sure that they're treated well in those countries where we know there's a hesitation on taking on more migrants on their soil? How do we know if a person is channeled into a mandatory border procedure and en route we realize that actually that person needs to be channeled to a regular asylum procedure, that person will actually be transferred? How do we make sure that there's no further Morias, that there are migrants waiting for months and years on end on an outcome on their claim? And so it's this kind of issue that's really crucial. And I think the recent case of Frontex and the allegations as to, for example, toleration or even complicity in pushbacks in the Aegean Sea show that there's really a clear need for independent monitoring systems, monitored systems that are able to pick up where it goes wrong, where there are aberrations, and that we can fix this, and that we have a commission that's powerful to react to such aberration and to fix problems. And so the question again there to the commissioner, the vice president, is can we set up pilots to test some of those newer elements? Or can we make sure that when there are these kind of aberrations that we have strong enough power to react on them? Thank you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Hanne. Well, I let the Vice President perhaps react to the questions he just heard, and then I will add my own comments and remarks. Please, Vice President.
Oops. Yes, I appreciate Hanne's remarks and the clarity and the simplicity, not simplicity, the clarity and the very simple way that she spelled out very complex issues. I think this helps this discussion. I will start with the negotiations. Of course, this is a file that, let's face it, it needs a certain level of physical presence on negotiations. I mean, you cannot discuss these issues in video conference. We did that two occasions. We have another council of ministers of interior on Monday, still virtual, but I'm sure that with a physical council, that would have been much more helpful. Nevertheless, I'm not disappointed by the early wave of reactions in the negotiations. I could even say that I'm rather encouraged, because we had an equal spread of pain and complaints, which is not what we had back in 2016, which we had very many "niet." Now we had more tactical moves, but I didn't sense, or I didn't read anyone shooting down the pact or anyone saying that this is a non-go for us. And quite interestingly, the southern member states, with their letter to the Chancellor, the tonality of which I found very correct and very accurate, not offensive at all, they try clearly to establish their focus on the negotiations, which is totally legitimate. But the funny thing is that some of the radicals in the South, they are accusing us of having gone totally the Visegrad way. And the early reactions from Visegrad say exactly the contrary, that we sold out to the South. So this type of reaction, for me, it's encouraging, because it creates the fundamentals, the conditions to move, to help everybody move along this landing zone. And if the question, Hanne's question, is whether deal clinching elements will be chips coming from other files or from within, my hints after so many years in European politics is that this is a package of 10 different elements. So there are many deal clinching chips to be used within the package so as to move beyond that. Coming now to implementation. You're absolutely right when you say that some of these novelties are not have been tested to certain member states, but not across the European Union. But we put them into the proposal because the experience from the member states where these were tested is a good one. This screening proposal, for example, is a proposal that you can see in not only in the external borders in the perimeter, in the periphery, but you can also see them in Amsterdam, in airport, or in arrival hubs. And the return sponsorship is something that has not been tested, but academically is sound. We have the money and we have the structures and the agencies to make it happen. And it's not outlandish for a member state to say, okay, I can organize on behalf of the European Union European returns for so many people who have to go back. And of course, in our proposal, it clearly says that failure to have them return would entail automatically a relocation. So there is an element where this return sponsorship is not a way out of your obligations. It's a way to keep you in to the system of the smart solidarity mix. And if, on the other side, a solidarity request from an entry member state, a country of first reception, is not met, the proposal has, in ultima ratio, a correcting mechanism in the hands of the Commission that would allow this solidarity gap to be, in a way, introduced by an implementing act. So in both extremes of the circuit, there will be always a correction to make sure that the circuit works. Now, on this mandatory border procedure, I will also agree with you that member states, in a way, should start anticipating the future, which is set by the pact, which one day will be adopted as community legislation, but work should start now. And in a way, it has already started. We have signed a new MOU with the Greek government last week on the new reception facility, multi-purpose facility in Lesbos, which under no circumstances we shall call the new Moria. We will find a new name. We're sure that the Greek mythology is a good source to find a new name, and Moria will become an olive grove and a museum for migration to remind us how things should be done and not how things should not have been done. So this new multi-purpose facility that we will set up in Lesbos in the next 4, 5, 6 months would be a preview of the things to come. It will be modern, it will be European, it will involve a very active involvement of the many people that the EU agencies have already on the ground, EASO, Frontex, Europol. We have almost 400 people there. So they would be in this center helping and working alongside the national authorities. And that would be, in a way, and it is meant like that, this center would be the precursor of how the border management, mandatory border management procedure would look like. And if someone were to push me to tell me how will this all be in 10, 15 years, in my mind, I have no doubt that external border management in 10, 15 years will be completely Europeanized, as it should be. That means that the management of the external borders and these procedures would be a procedure where national and European EU agencies will working side by side. I think we have a common interest to show that this is something that is not only symbolically important, but also meaningfully for the functioning of the circuit. It goes without saying that all borders procedures, it is in our proposal, will have to be accompanied by very strong fundamental rights management. It is precisely introduced to avoid any misunderstandings, and we have asked our fundamental rights agency in Vienna to make sure that this happens, and it will happen. As to the final point on Frontex and the allegations, I'm very reluctant to comment on these things on the basis of allegations, reports from Brussels. I think one should be on the ground to establish the facts. There are two things there that matter. I raised them both in my press conference yesterday. I said first that Frontex should be given the trust and the operational autonomy to do their job, which is to patrol our border. And they should do this fighting the smugglers and fighting hybrid threats and fighting the many dangers that they face. That's why we gave them so much money, so much personnel, precisely to do that in an area that will become much more important in the years to come. That's consideration number one. Consideration number two is that the EU will always be an asylum destination. This is what defines us. This is the European way of life. This is what we stand for. Anyone who wants to file an asylum claim in the EU should be able to do so. And I do not frankly find that these two considerations between Frontex's role and the sacrosanct right of asylum should be presented as binary, either or as opposing. In my mind, both things can be done. And we have started the process in the management board of Frontex precisely to clarify how the regulation that governs Frontex operations is fully respected.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of questions coming in, but before I do want to ask at least one on my own. And I guess that my first question is really about the issue itself that we are discussing. You alluded at the end to the fact that legal migration is a different discussion. And of course, if we look at total immigration numbers, the regular legal migration of students, of family reunions, dwarfs all the other migration that we are observing. So I guess my first question is, do we not need to discuss a common policy for that kind of migration? Because it is basically member states that have their policies for student visas, that have their policies for family reunions, and there's no need to have any European discussion, even though, of course, anyone who comes and then becomes a permanent resident starts having access to the entire internal market. So I would love to hear from you a bit more on this very regular legal migration, and of course also get a sense from you for the other part. How do you, I mean, you can't really call that illegal migration, right? Because part of that is also legal migration, meaning people seeking legally, as you said, for asylum. So how would you qualify that other part? And if you can just give us a bit of a sense of proportions on this. I do want to ask a second question also, which relates to your external dimension, which was, I think, your first point, where you sort of highlight the fact that the EU needs to have a common policy and needs to be able to work with transit countries, but also countries of origin, and support those countries in managing migration flows, in improving conditions for life, but perhaps also allowing for return migration in those countries. I mean, it's part of that external dimension. If you can give us a bit more of a sense what that means in practice in terms of implementation, who picks up the phone, who talks to whom, who uses, let's say, other instruments that the EU has, such as trade or development cooperation, incentives to convince those countries to be supportive. I mean, currently it is still a lot done by the member states, and part of the difficulty is, of course, that some member states have more and others have less leverage on the countries of origin than. And so unifying that sort of that approach certainly can increase Europe's leverage. And perhaps related to that, if I can add with this last thought, which is here by a person called Emil in our audience, and he asked the question, well, how does the EU manage not to be blackmailed by foreign countries which are using migratory pressures as political instruments? And I guess that question is particularly interesting and spicy for you as coming from Greece also originally, and your neighboring country at the moment is perhaps not the most easy neighboring country. So if you could comment a bit on that and the politics of that.
Okay, on the legal migration, intentionally we didn't include a legal migration component in this pact proposal. We decided to do it separately, and we will do it next year, early next year, mainly for two reasons. No one doubts that in a continent where demographically we clearly need more people, and also there is a skills shortage in areas that are crucial to our economy and society, we will need to organize meaningful systems of legal migration. But we thought that the subject per se merits a separate discussion rather than bringing it into the fold of the pact. And there is a second reason, more political if you like, Guntram, that we know that many governments are willing, who have some doubts on legal migration, are willing to consider legal migration once they know how the house will look like, how the pact will be legislated. And I think these are fair points. That's why we will keep it aside, but we'll do it in 2021. This will have three components, our proposal on legal migration. There will be a revision on the directive of long-term residents to allow for more movement of long-term residents across the European Union. Same revision of the single permit directive. And we will also develop a talent pool and partnerships so that we have a pool of people that we know we need, and we can organize this orderly. Parallel to that, I also consider, as part of the legal migration debate, the so-called humanitarian admission and other humanitarian and legal pathways of people in need of international protection. We already do a lot of that, but this will be part of our legal migration proposal. Now, on the external part, we have to do it differently. Let's put it on the other way. We have to do it differently in a way that goes beyond the silos of the European Union's external policies and actions. You are an insider. You do not expect me to tell you that there are many flowers blossoming in this garden. There's lots of competition, lots of different programs, lots of different money, lots of different recipients. And this has probably helped in a way to project the European Union in different geographical constituencies, but it has not helped to add this external dimension of migration policy. Juncker tried to do this with the Trust Fund for Africa and the Syrian Trust, but that was only money. So now the change of paradigm, on which I'm personally very much involved, because this represents a significant part of the mission letter that the president wrote to me when we started, is precisely how we bring all these commissioners, DGs, programs, and money, and policies and assets together in a way that we can make a difference in external relations of migration. We have to be targeted. We do not have to rebuild the world around us. We have to concentrate on 20, 25 third countries that are very relevant to the management of migration. And we have to establish what I now like to call country offers. So for each of these countries, there must be an offer, a package that would bring together all these different elements that I was referring to. And it will be also, this country offer, the basis of a contract of trust. It would be a do ut des, as we say in Latin. So that is what Europe can do for you. And that's what you can do on your side to make this a win-win. And the early stages of this process are always difficult, but I'm confident that we will manage. And I already agreed with Josep Borrell that in February we'll try to have a jumbo council of foreign and interior ministers to just press with this idea that things are changing. Now, on Turkey and other neighbors instrumentalizing slash weaponizing the misery of people who flee persecution or war for geopolitical reasons. I was with the leaders of the institutions in Evros in February, and believe me, I think this was a Rubicon moment. It was a Rubicon moment because precisely helped us understand the difference between what we want to achieve, which is an orderly migration policy with well-established procedures, and what happened in Evros, which was, let's face it, it was basically a hybrid threat against Europe. It was 20,000 people put in buses from Istanbul and other cities and ferried at the border of the European Union with the promise that, you can go through and do whatever you like. So this is something that the presence of the EU institutions there on the ground, together with the Prime Minister, with Frontex, it was also a preview of things to come. It shows that Europe can react, can protect our border. And this under no circumstances entails us becoming a fortress or refusing asylum, but we will never, never surrender or accept the weaponization or instrumentalization of migrants from third countries with the objective to sort of blackmail Europe. And this will not happen again. Evros was a watershed moment. It taught us a lot.
Wonderful. So let me read to you three questions. I think it's good to always bundle three. I still have seven here, but let's see how far we get. But those three I thought were quite interesting. So the first is by a person called Nico. And he's asking, well, can the migration crisis become an opportunity to enlarge the EU's development cooperation to reduce the reasons to migrate? Would EU citizens accept this? That's number one. A second question is by Anonymous. Many NGOs have expressed strong...
Sorry, Gudrun, can you please repeat the first question? I'm sorry about that.
Yes. So whether the migration crisis can become an opportunity to enlarge the development cooperation of the EU to reduce reasons for migration, and whether this is acceptable from a European citizen's point of view. Then there is a question about NGOs, and many NGOs have expressed strong criticism towards the pact. How does the pact guarantee that human rights, especially non-refoulement, are respected? And the third question is by Jose. Why isn't the EU making use of existing asylum laws to relocate people instead of keeping them detained in camps in Greece and Malta?
Yes, I'm starting with the first question on whether the migration policy would be an opportunity to redesign development policy. One should not forget that the European Union and our member states, Team Europe, together, we are the largest donor in the world of development aid. This in itself says a lot. But very often, development aid from the European Union fails to reach this part of the population in the developing countries that would make a difference and would address the root causes of migration. To give you an example, I mean, building a presidential palace or a new airport does not necessarily create more opportunities for people to have a better life in the country where these things are built. So our money, our development aid, I agree, should be modeled, targeted, especially young people, women, small and medium enterprises, everything where our support can make a difference and have a direct impact in the labor market. Of course, renewable energy is good, is okay, but renewable energy are profitable precisely because they do not have employment costs and labor costs. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. On NGOs, well, I would dispute the term strong criticism. Yes, the NGOs were more critical than in the 2016 proposal. But I guess that's the reason, because I repeat myself, the 2016 proposal was a solidarity proposal. And this is a proposal with a very strong doses of realism and responsibility elements. And responsibility clearly goes with borders, controls, returns, and I guess that certain NGOs would like the migration policy not to have this element, but I'm sorry to break the news. There is no way that Europe can have an agreement on migration policy whether accepting the simple premise that those who will not be granted asylum protection in Europe would have to be returned. It's as simple as that. Otherwise, the system will not hold. And not only the system, but our politics will be contaminated, populism will rise, extremism will rise. So we have to get it right through a pragmatic lens. On pushbacks and Frontex, I think I replied already. Now, on the last question, whether we could use existing tools to foster relocations and returns, well, on relocations, it happens, but as I was saying earlier, it happens on an uncoordinated ad hoc basis. It helped us because that contributed to taking off some of the pressure out from the Greek islands to Germany and other recipient countries. But although it happens, it is not part of this circuit model, this connected whole that we would like to see, where there is more order, more legal guarantees, more predictability, and more Europeanism. Of course, relocation on ad hoc basis is a solution, but is not the solution.
Thank you. I do want to also hear from Hanne if she has anything to add, but I also do want to read one or two more questions. So let me read those two questions, and then both Hanne and you, Vice President, you can comment. There is one question by again on Turkey by Kurt Geisert, who asks whether you agree that it continues to be very important that Turkey plays a constructive role in the migration process. That's so that pushing you to say a bit more on Turkey, really, and also the existing agreement with Turkey. And a second comment is here by, again, someone anonymous who says, well, I hear greatly improved facilities will be created in the Greek islands to accommodate migrants arriving from Turkey. Will this be a magnet for increased immigration flows? And lastly, very quickly also, on the border screening procedure, my colleague Jolt is asking, well, how do you ensure that member states will implement the common procedure and principles uniformly? Hanne, perhaps I can give you also the floor for literally one minute or 2 minutes, and then the Vice President has the last word to sort of wrap up.
Yes, thank you very much for giving the opportunity briefly to make sure. I think if I can briefly jump in on the last question, I think the EASO the European Asylum Support Office can also play quite an important role. Its officers have also supported, for example, Greek asylum authorities in the past. And so I think a key step forward also in the pact is really thinking through when can we adopt this new regulation that establishes the European Union Asylum Agency, because that would also enlarge their mandate in terms of actual support to member states, which is crucial for those who are receiving or seeing the arrival of many mixed flows, migrants and asylum seekers, and also in terms of a better monitoring of what is happening in the member states. So that's a key one, which we're all looking forward to in the coming period.
Please, Vice President, please.
Yes, on Turkey, I understand the push for more detail. I'm happy to comply. Yes, I agree that Turkey can play a positive role on migration management. And I also agree that the fact that they keep 400 million Syrians on their soil, making them the country on earth with the biggest number of refugees on their territory, it's a commendable fact. Of course, with our support, with our support,
4 million.
Yeah, I think it's the correct number is it fluctuates between 3.5 to 4. So the fact, of course, that this is with the financing of the European Union, okay, it's a caveat, but I think that Turkey should be commended for their effort. My problem is when they have these bursts of ideas like the Evros idea that was totally contrary to the very good work that they are doing under normal circumstances. So I expect in the future to see more normality from Turkey than instrumentalization. And we will be ready to help. I visited Ankara on the 4th day of our mandate. I discussed at length with President Erdogan, and I conveyed the European Union's commitment to keep engaging with Turkey on a positive agenda that includes migration. But of course, since a lot has happened that has burdened the overall atmospherics of the EU-Turkey relationship, it's now being discussed across the street. There is a certain uneasiness. I don't think that Turkey helped themselves on the positive agenda. They did more on the negative agenda. I do hope that we will get a total reset in the EU-Turkey relationship, where there's no doubt in my mind that amongst the positive elements, migration and intelligence cooperation, security cooperation would be key. Now, on the question which I got many times, whether the new centers in Lesbos, and some say the new pact with all its guarantees would be an additional pull factor for more people to come to Europe, my answer is rather simple. The biggest pull factor that Europe has at this moment derives from the precise fact that we do not have an EU migration policy. This is the pull factor per excellence. When people start these perilous journeys from Afghanistan or Niger or sub-Saharan Africa, they do that because they know that there is the possibility to go through the cracks of a system that does not exist. Same thing for the smugglers. If the smugglers make a lot of money, it's precisely under the understanding that this European circuit is not in place. So it is in our interest to have an agreement on the pact and have this circuit in place, because that would be the only way to fight against the smugglers and to counter the pull factor narrative that we're now suffering from.
Well, we end precisely on time. So, and unfortunately, it is already over the 1 hour. We could have gone on for a long time because it's such an important topic and such a multifaceted and complex topic. At this stage, I can only thank you, Margrethe Skinners, for your presentation, your clear explanation of what you intend to do. And I can, of course, also thank and want to thank Hanne Behrens for her remarks and her contribution to today's debate. And I do want to thank all of our listeners for not only listening, but many of you also for asking questions on the chat. It was, I thought, a very fruitful and a very interesting discussion. So thank you again, Commission Vice President, and good luck with, well, the whole political process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me and for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.